Hi maths students, it's Mr. Hajgassim here, and today we're going to learn how to work out the mean from a frequency table. Now, the mean is a type of average, and an average basically tells us what is a typical value that we can expect. So here's an example of working out the mean. It says Peter rolled a dice a six-sided dice 7 times. Here are his scores. So of the 7 rolls, he rolled a 3, then he rolled a 2, then he rolled a 4, a 6, a 5, a 3, and then a 6 again. So what is the typical number that he achieved? So on average, what is the typical number that he obtained when he rolled a dice? And to work that out, we can find the mean. Now, to find the mean, we would have to add all the values that we have. And if I just use my pen, so here's my pen. We would have to add all the values that we have. So the mean is equal to sum of all values divided by the total number of values. So in this case, the sum of the values will be 3 plus 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus 5 plus 3 and plus 6 again. And in total we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 values divided by 7. And the question tells us he rolled the dice 7 times, so we should have 7 values. Now, if we add these up, so this is going to be 5, 9, 15, 20, 23, 29, we'll get an answer of 29 over 7. And you can use your calculator to work these questions out. Usually we would get an answer of 4.14 to 2 decimal places. So the mean will be equal to 4.14 to 2 decimal places. So you have to be very good at calculating the mean, and this is typically how the mean is calculated. However, this question is quite straightforward because we only have a few values. What if we had lots of values? And this is where frequency tables come in hand. Now, if I just move on and delete everything I have here, what I want us to understand, so you can pause the video and you can ask yourself, or is this statement true or false? Is 2 plus 2 plus 2 the same as 2 times 3? Well, the answer to that is yes, this statement is true. And the reason being, well, 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 6, and 2 times 3 is also 6. So these two are equal. 2 plus 2 plus 2 and 2 times 3 is the same thing. In other words, we can simplify this bit on the left, and rather than adding 2 3 times, we can say, well, we have 3 lots of 2's. We have 1 2, we have 2 2, and we have 3 2's. So in total, we have 3 lots of 2's. So rather than adding, we would simplify the process and instead use the multiplication operation. Let's do another example. So again, have a look at this. You can pause the video and ask yourself, is this statement true? And the answer again will be yes, this statement is true because 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6 makes 42. We've added 6 7 times. This is equal to 42. And 7 times 6 is also equal to 42. So once again, what we're saying is we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lots of 6's. So rather than writing 6 7 times, we can simply write 7 times 6 and make our calculation a lot easier, especially if you had a larger amount of numbers to deal with. So it's very important to understand this concept that addition can be rewritten as a multiplication problem. All right, and let's move on. So here we have some information about a football team. So a football team played 20 games. The coach recorded the amount of goals they scored in each game. So these are the number of goals they scored in each game. They scored 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, and then they scored 1, and then they scored 2 in some games, they scored 3 in some games, and they also scored 4 in some games. So we can calculate the mean, and we can calculate the mean by adding all the values together. So we could do 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, and we add all the values. And then whatever the sum is, we will divide by 20. Now, this is quite a long process because you would have to type in lots of numbers into your calculator and add them on. And for this example, we're lucky we only have 20 games. What if it was a full Premiership season of 38 games? It would be very long. So what we can actually do, rather than following this process that we learned, we can insert this information into a frequency table. And if we move on to the next slide, we will see what a frequency table looks like. So here we have the number of goals, and on this column, we have the frequency. Now, frequency just means the number of times something occurs. So I'm just going to make a note of that. So how many times something occurs? How many times something occurs? So let's think about the number of goals then. We have 0, we have 1, and in some games they scored 2, and in some games they scored 3, and in some games they scored 4. So how many times did they score 0 goals? Well, if we count here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in 5 games they scored 0 goals. How many times did they score 1 goal? In 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games, they scored one goal. How many times did they score 2 goals? So 1, 2, 3, 4. In 4 games, they scored 2 goals. And in 3 games, they scored 3 goals. And in 2 games, they scored 4 goals. So this is useful because by knowing the frequency, we can find out the total number of goals quicker. So if I just draw another column and call this column the fx column, fx being f for frequency and x being for the number of goals. So fx is the frequency multiplied by the number of goals. And what I mean by that is over here, I mean, if we add 0 5 times, it's still going to be 0. So we know the sum of these zeros, it's still 0. However, over here, we could do 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, or going back to that exercise we did when we decided whether two sides of an equation were equal to each other. Rather than saying 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, we can rewrite this as 1 times 5. Or in other words, we have, 6, I should say. 1 times 6. So we have 6 lots of 1s. So the sum of these 1s is 6, or we could say 6 lots of 1s. So what we can do here is multiply the frequency by the number of goals to get the total number of goals. So this is going to be 6, and 5 times 0 is going to be 0. And then likewise here, how many times did they score 2 goals? Well, we could either do 2 plus 2 plus 2, which will give us a total of 8, or we could say we have 4 lots of 2s. So we could do 4 times 2, which is a total of 8 goals. How many times did they score 3 goals? Well, again, we could either do 3 plus 3 plus 3, or we could do 3 lots of 3s, which will give us a total of 9 goals. And lastly, we could do 4 plus 4, or we could say we have 2 lots of 4s, so we can simply rewrite this as 2 times 4, and that will give us a total of 8 goals. Now that we have the fx column, if we add the sum of the fx column, we would get the total number of goals scored. Essentially, the fx column is all all of these values added together, or it's the sum of all of these values. So I can say fx is equal to the sum, this sign being the sum of the following values added together. However, rather than adding them, I just did simple multiplication, which makes your method more methodical, and when you're dealing with lots of data, easier to process. So the sum here will be, well, 6 plus 8 is 14, plus 9 is 23, plus 8 is 31. And then we said that they played a total of 20 games, and if we add up the frequency, that should give us the number of games played. So they played 11, 5 and 6 makes 11, plus 4 makes 15, plus 3 makes 18, plus 2 makes 20. So now that we have the sum of fx, or the sum of the total number of goals scored, and we know how many games they played in total, we can find the mean by doing the sum of fx divided by the sum of f. And this would be the same as doing adding all of these up and then dividing by 20 to find the mean. So what we would have is 31 divided by 20, and our answer will be 31 divided by 20 is 1.55. So the mean is equal to 5.55. Now you might ask, oh, how can they possibly score an average of 1.55 goals per game? Well, they can't, but based on the figures that we have, we're looking at an average of just over 1.5 goals a game. Now that doesn't mean that they're going to score 1.5 goals, because that's impossible, but the average works out at about 1.55. So if you have your books, it's very important to understand this and to copy it down. All right, and if I rub out what I've done, and moving on to the next example. So here it says a teacher asked his class for how long they spent revising for a test to the nearest hour. By calculating the mean, compare the amount of time the boys and the girls spent revising for the test. So again, we can start by doing this example visually. So here it says zero boys spent 0 hours. Over here we have 2 boys spent 1 hour studying. So 2 boys each spent 1 hour and 1 hour. So that is a total of 2 hours. And then we have 3 boys who each spent 2 hours revising. So we can say 2 hour, 2 hour, 2 hour, which will give us a total of 6 hours. Now here we have 4 boys who studied for 3 hours each. So again, we can draw 4 boys who studied 3 hours each. So that's going to be 3, 6, 9, 12 hours in total. And then we have 5 boys who spent 4 hours studying each. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and each of them spent 4 hours. So that would be a total of 4, 8, 12, 16, 20 hours. And then lastly, we had 1 boy who must have been really hard working, and he spent 5 hours in total revising, and that is a total of 5 hours. So to find the mean, we need to find the total number of hours spent. And this is one way of looking at this. Now, in an exam, you won't need to draw the matchstick men, or you won't need to draw diagrams, we can use our frequency table to work out the mean. But I just wanted to show you visually what we mean by frequency and hours, how that actually applies to real life. So to find the mean, we would have to add up all of these values, or the total number of hours spent. So the total number of hours spent is going to be 2 plus 6 is 8, plus 12 is 20, plus 20 is 40, plus 5 is 45. So 45 hours spent in total. Now, how many students were there in total? Well, the total number of students were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So that's 45 hours spent between 15 boys. So the mean number of hours spent revising is going to be 45 divided by 15, which will give us 45 divided by 15, which will give us a mean of 3 hours. So again, what we want is the total number of hours spent revising, and we could have rewritten this as 1 hour plus 2 hours, plus 2 hours, plus 2 hours, plus 3 hours, plus 3 hours, plus 3 hours, plus 3 hours, and so on. And then we could have found the sum and then divided the number of hours by the total number of values that we would have had, which would have been 20 values. So, which would have been 15 values. But rather than doing this, we can use our frequency table. So I'm just going to rub out this diagram that I have, or that I've drawn. So we said for the boys, the mean was equal to 45 over 15, which is equal to 3 hours. Now for the girls, I'm going to use the method that I've shown you, and this is the method you would use for most frequency table problems and in an exam. So what we need is an FX column. Sorry about this, it's a little bit, in fact, let me see if I can draw it with lines. There we go. Will make our work a lot neater. Okay. Now what we need to do is to draw our FX column. So the number of hours will be X and F for frequency. So 2 students spent 0 hours studying. So in total, that's 0 hours studied. 7 students spent 1 hour studying. So that's going to be 7 lots of 1, or 7 times 1, which is simply going to be 7 hours. 2 students spent 2 hours revising, so that's a total of 4 hours. 2 students spent 3 hours revising, so that's a total of 6 hours. 1 student spent 4 hours revising, that's a total of 4 hours. And 1 student spent 5 hours revising, so that's a total of 5 hours. Now, what we have here is the sum of all the hours spent revising. Again, if we were to list this out, we could say 2 students spent 0 hours, 7 students spent 1, and 2 students spent 2, and so on. But we're not going to do that because that's quite time consuming. Rather than doing that, we're going to use multiplication to make our calculations a lot easier. So now the sum of fx is going to be, so we said mean is equal to the sum of fx over the sum of f. This sign here just means sum, and sum means total. So sum is equal to total. And the sign for sum is this sign over here. So the sum of fx is going to be 7 plus 4 is 11, 11 plus 6 is 17, plus 4 is 21, plus 5 is 26. So the sum of fx is 26 divided by the sum of f. So that's going to be 9, 10, 11, 13, 14, 15 students. And 26 divided by 15, if we use our calculator to work this out, we will get 1.73 hours. So we said for the boys, the mean was equal to 3 hours. For the girls, the mean is equal to 1.73 hours. And if we were to make a comparison, so the mean here is equal to 1.73 hours. If we were to make a comparison, we can say the boys studied more on average based on the calculations that we have done. All right, I'm going to do one more example and then we can wrap it up there. So if we move on to this last question and if I rub everything out. Okay, so it says the table shows the number of pets that 100 students have. So now we have a very, very large data set because we have 100 students that we need to consider. So a frequency table is perfect for this sort of problem. So it says find the mean from the frequency table. So again, it says 13 people had 0 pets. So I could list 13 lots of zeros. And then I could list 28 lots of ones because 28 people had 1 pet. So I could write 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 and so on. But that's just going to take forever. And in an exam, you just don't have time to list all the numbers and values that you have. So again, what we need to do is to draw an fx column. Let's call the number of cats x. Let's call the frequency f. And I'm just going to write them inside a bracket. And we can draw our fx column. So this is going to be fx. And then we can say, well, we had 13 lots of zeros. So 13 times 0 is simply 0. We had 28 lots of ones. So 28 students had 1 pet. That's a total of 28 pets. So 1 times 28 is 28. And then 60 students had 2 pets. So that's going to be a total of 120 pets. And then we could say 9 students had 3 pets. So that's going to be a total of 27, excuse me. That's going to be a total of 27. So what we then need to do, well, we know that the mean is equal to the sum of fx, or the sum of all the values that we have, divided by the number of values we have, or in other words, the sum of the frequency. So we know that we asked 100 students, so we're going to have 100 values. So the sum of f is going to be 100, which is correct. If we add this up, 13 plus 28 makes 41, plus 60 makes, is this correct? Do we have an error here? 13 plus 28 plus 60 plus 9. Gives us 110 actually. Oh, so maybe the question, there might be an error in the question actually. Maybe the question should be 110 students because we can't have in this example, or we shouldn't have in this example, a frequency of 110. So I'm just going to change that to 110. So there is a small error in the question. I do apologize. There we go. So we can change that to 110. So our frequency is going to be 110 rather than 100. So just going to change this All right, that makes better sense. Our frequency is going to be 110, so that's the sum of our frequency, which is 110, and our fx column, well, the sum of fx is going to be 148 plus 27 is going to be 168, 175. Now we'll just double check that. So we'll get 175 divided by 110. So the mean will be equal to 175 divided by 110. That will give us 1.621 decimal place. Right, so boys and girls, I hope you found this useful. The key about the mean is to understand what it means. The mean is the total amount of values that you have, or the sum of the total amount of values you have, divided by the number of values that you have. And we did that in the first example, so if I just rub this off and use my mouse to go back all the way to the first example that we did. To work out the mean of this problem, we added all the values together and then we divided the sum by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we divided the sum by 7. Now that works perfectly fine when we have a small data set, but when we have a very large data set, as we had with this example here, we would have to use a frequency table to work out the mean. Otherwise, you will just be there sitting and calculating for a very, very, very long time. I hope you found this useful and thank you for watching.